everybody. Welcome. It's good to see everybody. Still in masks, sorry, but welcome. It's been a couple years since we've seen you, so I really appreciate everyone coming out. To get this party rolling, I'd like to introduce Professor Henry Yang, the Chancellor of the University of California, Santa Barbara. Chancellor?
Good morning. Welcome. I'm honored to be here to welcome you to the 2020 South County Economic Summit, hosted by the Economic Forecast Project of UC Santa Barbara. Since 1981, the project has provided our community with information on economic, demographic, and regional business trends. This yearly summit helps us to inform us the vision and the decision for our local educators, elected officials, and business leaders. Thank you to our South County Board of Directors of the project for your leadership and support. Thank you to our sponsors, including Union Bank, Montecito Bank and Trust, American Riviera Bank, and the Grappler Foundation, as well as our local business leaders. We are grateful for the support and the resources you have dedicated to make the project a success over the past 4 decades. I would like to thank our Executive Director of the project, Professor Peter Ruper. Also, thank you to our guest speakers, Jagdeep Singh Bakhar, Josh Williams, Jean Deering, and David Kim. I want just to add a word that Jagdeep is the Chief Investment Officer of the entire University of California system, and he manages the endowment for UC Santa Barbara. He's not only a financial genius, but also an academic visionary. Today's summit is in part a reflection of our campus reputation as a center for innovation and entrepreneurship, and our commitment to promote economic growth for our community, our state, and our nation. Forbes has listed UC Santa Barbara among the top most entrepreneurial universities in the country. We average 90 to 100 innovation disclosures annually, and nearly half are under licensing agreement. Our university is fortunate to be part of such a dynamic community. Our campus and the community support and enhance each other in so many countless ways. UC Santa Barbara is ranked by US News as the top number 5 best colleges among all public universities. And UC Santa Barbara is also included among the institutions with the number 5 highest diversity index rating. We are number 9 for producing Nobel laureates in this century, according to London Times Higher Education. Together with our community, we are advancing innovation and creating new companies and new jobs. I want to thank each and every one of you, our educators, our elected officials, our business leaders, and our our community members for your vision, your support, and your commitment. Now, I'm delighted to introduce our Economic Forecast Project Executive Director, Peter Ruper. Peter served as the Senior Economic Advisor to the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland for 13 years before joining the faculty at the UC Santa Barbara in 2008 as a professor of economics. He's the past chairman of our Department of Economics and Associate Director of the Laboratory for Aggregate Economics and Finance. We call it LAEF, L-A-E-F. LAEF's director is our Nobel laureate in economics, Finn Kidlin. Peter's areas of specialization includes macroeconomics, labor economics, and family economics. Some of his recent research has focused on the mechanics' new Keynesian model and unemployment and unsecured debts. We appreciate Peter for his innovative and dynamic leadership and for the unique expertise and insights that he brings to our economics forecast project. Please join me in welcoming Peter.
Thanks, Henry. Thank you, Henry. He didn't mention that I dress up really nicely either. So it's my pleasure now to introduce the chairman of the chairman of the board of the Economic Forecast Project, and founder and former president of Village Properties, Ed Edick. Ed?
My name is Ed Edick. I recently became chair of the Economic Forecast Project, taking over for Steve Ingalls. Steve has been a board member for many years and has put in countless hours of service to this project. And Steve has written a few words he would like me to read to you. After 2 years of no in-person events, the Economic Forecast Board of Directors welcomes you, our sponsors and friends, to the 2022 Economic Forecast Summit. I wish I could be here with you to introduce Ed Edick, but health issues are presently keeping me behind the scenes, so to speak. Ed takes the position of board chair for me, and I personally thank him for stepping up quickly with little notice. Also, I want to thank our sponsors again for staying involved these past 2 years. I hope to see you soon, Steve Ingalls. Fine fellow. As for me, I am honored to be here today filling Steve's large shoes. Without the support of all of our sponsors, this community asset would not exist. As important to all of you are to us, I especially want to recognize our founding sponsor, Union Bank, our platinum sponsor, Montecito Bank and Trust, and our keynote sponsor, American Riviera Bank. Also, as Henry mentioned, we continue to get major support from the Gretler Foundation. Our board of directors is a group of local business leaders whose dedication and support to this project continues to amaze me. At this time, I'd like all the Economic Forecast board members to please stand and be recognized for your efforts. If you would like information about the benefits of being a sponsor, which go far beyond today, please contact myself or any one of these fine people you saw standing up. Lastly, if you enjoy what you're seeing today, take a moment to send a note to the sponsor that invited you. I'd appreciate it. So at this point, I would like to welcome my friend Peter Ruper back to the stage, and we'll begin the program. Enjoy.
Okay, so today's program is basically welcome everybody back to in live performance. And today's event, we decided what we want to do, since you've all been in hibernation, you've had no information over the last 2 years, that we're going to make this very, very local. And the speakers we have today are people who have their boots on the ground and seeing what's going on in Santa Barbara. I'll talk about them in a second. I want to just sort of start off by sort of laying the groundwork for what they're going to talk about. I'm going to talk initially about at the national level, and then Gene and David and Josh are going to talk about things very, very local, what's going on. So I'll set the stage for them. You'll notice that I have 2 exclamation points here for welcome back, but on this slide I have a question mark. I do welcome you back, but the question is, are we actually back to where we were pre-pandemic? And that's going to lay out for many, many years, I believe, that trying to figure out where we're going to be in the next few years. So I want to start out by showing some foot traffic. This is cell phone data that people use to think about where people are and where they've been. This comes from a company called SafeGraph. And so this first is total foot traffic in Santa Barbara. So what SafeGraph does, I know you guys hate to know this, but they know where you are every second of the day. They know what stores you go to. Your cell phone tells them. Now, they don't know who you are, but they know where the cell phone is. So what we're going to see, this is total. So what they do is they look at all the locations in a city. So for example, here we have Santa Barbara and Galeta. We just aggregate over all of the locations, that is restaurants, bars, supermarkets, retail stores, whatever. And then we know how many cell phones are showing up there. I'm not paying attention to the vertical axis here because they kind of have an estimate, and don't worry about that. But the point is here to look at the trend. And what you can see before the pandemic, we're kind of going along like this, people showing up in different locations in Santa Barbara. Starting here, here's the pandemic. You can see exactly what happened. And are we back? The answer is, it doesn't look like it in terms of foot traffic downtown. So people aren't showing up like they used to. I think that's going to change over time. This is for a couple of different kinds of establishments. This is, the airport is in red. You can see the airport took decline, obviously, like everything else during the pandemic. And since then has really kind of rebounded to, back to where they are. Hotels, almost back. So hotels are getting close to coming back. So that's good. We know that people are starting to attend events here in Santa Barbara, coming from out of town, et cetera. This is, yeah. So let's start with wineries. So as you can see, we were kind of moving along in wineries, and people aren't going out to wineries as much as they did. What's kind of distressing is that all you guys are drinking at home now. You're visiting liquor stores more often. Get outside. Drink with your friends, for heaven's sakes. This in-home drinking has got to stop, okay? Dispensaries, they're okay. Beer, wine, and liquor stores, I showed. Breweries, not hit so bad. So anyway, so some of this is back, some is not back. This is supermarkets. I don't quite get this one. Again, a big decline, pandemic, and now supermarkets aren't back. Maybe for lots of reasons. Maybe people are not shopping as often. They don't want to get out as often, so they shop less frequently. They buy more stuff. Maybe Instacart is working, that one person shopping for 5 people. I don't know. But that's not back, these visits. Brief overview of the real estate market in the nation. Super hot residential market across the board, in fact, across the world pretty much. And we'll talk a little bit about where commercial's headed. Gene's going to talk about that. But this is what housing prices look like from the Case-Shiller House Price Index. And you can see, we thought it was just completely nuts going into the Great Recession, that this can't happen. And of course, it didn't happen, as we saw about a 40% decline in house prices during the Great Recession. We grew slowly, and look what's happened since the pandemic. Since the pandemic, all of these locations, San Francisco, Los Angeles is number 1, by the way. It's grown about 30-some% since the beginning of the pandemic, house prices. Phoenix is the highest growth one here. It's 50% since the pandemic. These are crazy types of prices. Is it sustainable? I always keep saying it can't be sustainable, saying 30% house price growth. It's gone on for a couple years. David's going to talk a little bit more about that locally. Everybody asks what's happening in office space. That is, I think everyone believes everyone's going to work at home all the time. This is from CBRE. CBRE is the largest commercial real estate company in the world. This is what they're thinking about. This is office space vacancy, so you can see what happened right before the pandemic. Office space vacancy in the US was pretty much as low as it's ever been. We hit the pandemic, everybody left the office, the vacancy rates went up. What is CBRE forecasting, and what is it they're doing in terms of buying? Well, you can see their forecast is these vacancy rates are going to go back down as people start to come back to the office. Now, does it mean people come back full time? That part's not clear. Again, Gene will talk a little bit about that. This is office space asking rent. This is basically what they ask, and you can see that right before the pandemic, actually, we started to see a little bit of a decline. They believe these office space rents are going to go back up and kind of level out to where they had been pre-pandemic numbers. So again, CBRE, they're putting their money out there. They believe that office is coming back. Maybe not full-time, but certainly office is coming back. Labor market, I'm going to look at the U.S. again. Josh Williams will talk a little bit more about that, more locally. Unemployment rate is very low, and if you just look at the unemployment rate, which for some reason many people do, it looks like the labor market's fantastic. But there's many, many puzzling things going on in the labor market in my view. This is one of the crazy ones, and I hate the pandemic for this. It's really screwed up our graphs because we have to incorporate this, and so it makes everything else look small. My hope is that in the future we'll blank out the pandemic from all our data and just forget about it. But so what happened? So the blue line are the number of unemployed people, and you can see that during the Great Recession, the number of unemployed people went from about 6 million to 14 million. And at the same time, during recessions, you can see that job openings, that is the number of vacancies that businesses have, fall. That's obvious about a recession, right? That people are hiring less. And you can see what happened right after the Great Recession. Here, we see that, basically there are 5 people looking for one job. That's what that kind of says, right? There are about 5 people looking for every job. As we started to come out of the recession, the vacancies went up and up and up. That is more job openings. Unemployment obviously came down. And for the first time ever from these data, which started in 2000, there's a crossing point right here, which there are more vacancies than unemployed people. That means if you want a job, you got it, right? You're the only person looking for the job, basically. This, by the way, this huge spike here, we know what happened, right? Everybody had to go. And now you can see again, what we have is, historically, we have more job openings than in history of these data, and it's much, much higher than the number of unemployed people. So there are lots of jobs available out there. For some reason, people aren't taking them. And there could be lots of reasons. We need another couple hours to go through that. But this is, again, another way to look at this. This data comes from the BLS. It's called Job Opening and Labor Turnover Survey. And what I like to look at, kind of crazy, not the unemployment rate, I like to look at this variable, the quit rate. So this is the quit rate. So obviously, during a recession, like in 2000, 2001, the Great Recession, people don't quit. Why? There are no jobs out there. During a recession like that, you kiss the boss's ass, right? You do anything you can. Yes, I'll get you coffee. I'll do whatever you need. I want a job. You don't quit. To me, a really healthy labor market is there's opportunities out there for people to grow. That is, to switch jobs, to get a better opportunity, to move up the job ladder, and that's what we typically see. And so what we see now, quits are the highest they've ever been in these data. And again, you can see that the job openings has just skyrocketed, and the hiring is also, very high. So this is very kind of still puzzling. We're trying to work through this in the labor market, but to me, the labor market's strong, and that people are now starting to quit and find better opportunities, which is just better for everyone. It's a better match. This is labor force participation. This is how many people have decided to work. That is, they're either employed or unemployed out of the total population. This goes back to 1949. And what you can see, we all know these data, that the labor force participation rate of men has been falling over time. The red line is women. It had been increasing over time and pretty much flattened out. The only increase that we've seen in about the last 20 years is old farts. So they're working more, and their stupid children, they're sitting home playing the Xbox. Do something. You guys should be doing fun stuff and make your kids work for you. I mean, this is crazy. This hasn't changed in about 10 years, that this really low labor force. Some of it's school, of course, but some of it's, like I said, I'll call it lazy. But labor force participation's not back. And so what does that mean? When you think about the unemployment rate, if all of a sudden these people start to enter the labor market and want to work, the unemployment rate's going to go up. So one reason the unemployment rate is really low is that there aren't many people sort of searching for jobs right now in terms of they're out of the labor force. So that's going to be a big deal. Many of you might have heard this graph has average hourly earnings in blue. It just came out. that it's kind of the highest it's been since, except for this spike here. This spike, by the way, in terms of average hourly earnings is not because people started earning more. It's because they laid off all the low-paid workers. That's the reason the average went up so much. As those people started to come back into the labor force, average hourly earnings fell. But if you look today, average hourly earnings growth of around 4.5%, 5% is kind of the highest we've seen in a long time. The problem with that is inflation is 8.5%, which means your real earning power has fallen. So that's why today, we'll talk a little bit more with Jagdeep, the Fed's meeting today, expecting a 50 basis point increase and some pretty harsh words from the Fed, trying to get that inflation rate down. Again, this means people's real incomes are falling. They're not getting richer, they're getting poorer because of inflation. Forecasting. I do run the Economic Forecast Project. I don't forecast. I don't like being wrong half the time. Let's talk about the Fed. So the Fed does something called a dot plot. A dot plot is that all the members of the FOMC, that is the Board of Governors and all the bank presidents, the Federal Reserve Bank presidents, they say what they think is going to happen in the future. Now, the Fed has, I don't know, in total maybe 600 economists. This is all they do, right? They give a forecast. So let me show you what this forecast looks like. So this is real GDP. This is, gross domestic product or real income, if you will. I will tell you right now, no one forecasts that. No one. No one forecasts this pandemic or the size of it. No one, once we knew that it happened, we see this huge growth. So this is what really, really happened, right? And so the latest report was that real GDP fell by 1.4%. What did our friends at the Fed, 600 economists, they know everything? These flat lines are their prediction. At the end of every year, they have to go out 3 years and say what they predicted. So for example, if you look at the 2019 prediction, they predict for 2020 going out to 2023. I could have done that. Okay, it looks like it's always looked. Fine, great, thank you so much, 600 economists. 2021, go out 3 years. Huh, flat again, huh? Flat again, okay. Nice prediction. How about inflation? This is what inflation has done. We know it's been low, incredibly low. Now we have, by the way, this is PCE inflation. This is what the Fed looks at. The Fed doesn't look at the CPI. We can talk more about that at some other time. The Fed looks at the personal consumption expenditures index. So it was incredibly low, shot up to over 5%, 6%. What did our Fed friends tell us? Wow. This was their 2020 prediction. By the way, they have this 2% thing where they say inflation in the long run is going to be 2%. The only time it's ever 2% is when it crosses it going from negative to positive, So here you can see what they've done. They forecast in 2019, that it would be flat, a little over 2%. We hit 2021, they forecast kind of flat, go up to 2%. Now they have some data, and they're like, okay, we have to forecast for 2022 going out. They don't have, 2021's not finished, what they did. So what they predict is it's going to fall pretty fast and then go back to their 2% long run thing. And again, I'll talk to Jagdeep a little bit about this. Who are you going to believe? If you think, by the way, if you read the last few years what the Fed has been saying about inflation, it's transitory because of supply chain issues. My question to the Fed was, how many years does it have to be there before you say it's not transitory, right? So is this purple line, is it going to look like that? Is that how fast it's going to come down? Or is it going to come down like that? That's going to matter a lot for policy going forward and our decisions. Okay, so that's why you're here, right? We don't have to listen to the Fed anymore. We know what they do. You can just come here and we'll give you all the information. Or call Jagdeep. That's what I would recommend. Okay, so now we're going to get to the in-depth look. First off is going to be David Kim. David's with Village Properties, residential real estate. Gene's going to come up and talk about what's going on commercial-wise. It's kind of fascinating. Josh Williams from BW Research did a major study on sort of employment here in the county. And then Jagdeep Bashir and I will sit over there and we'll have a nice conversation about the future of investing, what he's thinking about, and what's happening to your wealth. Anyway, so I'd like to welcome David Kim. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Rupert. All right, need my clicker here. I'm not a PowerPoint guy, so bear with me. Good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here and share some in-depth knowledge of the Santa Barbara residential real estate market. So let's get started here. We're in a seller's market. Prices are up. There's no inventory. Thank you, everybody. Seriously, though, that's pretty much the gist of what I'm going to be talking about. So if you end up falling asleep, just remember those three things. I'm going to do what I'm pretty sure is a first here at the Granada, and I'm going to show a TikTok video on the big screen. And I promise it is relevant to real estate.
Excuse me, is that apple for sale? Yeah, we're about to put it on sale right now, actually. Well, I'm in the market, so tell me about your apple. Why should I buy it? Nice try. Okay, people, here's how this is gonna work. I have an apple here. The highest bidder's going home with this. I want all bids in the next 2 minutes, then we're closing it. Bidding starts at $5.
Feeling pretty confident there, huh? I mean, don't you think...
$10.
He said starting at 5.
15.
Is this a new apple?
Yeah, just listed. I'm pre-qualified. I'll pay cash. I got cash. 20. 30. 40. No, just make it 45.
Is it even worth that?
50. I don't know. Please, this is the 8th apple I've tried to buy.
Could I at least see it up close?
Nope, it's an apple. You know what it is. You either want it or you don't. I'll take it for 100.
What? I'm from California. It's the cheapest apple I've ever seen.
120.
Why did I do that? Why? I don't...
So sounds like that sounds familiar to a lot of you out there. I think the only change is the dude from California would be the dude from the Bay Area coming here. So historically, there are two types of real estate markets. There is the buyer's market, which is what we saw during the financial crisis 2008-2009, where there were more homes for sale than there were buyers in the market. And then there's the seller's market, which is what we're accustomed to seeing nowadays, where there are far more buyers in the market than there are homes for sale. And what happened during the pandemic was a subcategory of the seller's market was created, and my good friend Randy Freed calls that the seller's auction market. And that was beautifully illustrated in that TikTok video, where the listing price of a home ends up being the opening bid, and the sale price ends up going higher, and in many cases it goes much higher. Because in this seller's auction market, the negotiation is no longer between buyer and seller, but rather it's between buyer and all the other buyers that are competing. So I'm sure there are some of you out there who are currently going through this process trying to buy a home, or maybe you know somebody who is, and when a new listing hits the market, the first thing you ask is, how much over the asking price do we have to offer? Going to open houses nowadays looks like this, like a house party on the 6600 block of DP. If the fingers crossed emojis are in your most frequently used, then you're probably trying to buy a house right now, or you're a buyer's agent. And this is my first shot at making a meme, so I think I'll stick to my day job, though. I'm sure there are a number of you out there as well who are tempted by the idea of selling your home, seeing what home prices are these days, and you're getting all these postcards from the pesky realtors in the mail saying, now's the time to sell, and do you know how much your house is worth? But then the reality sinks in, and you realize how competitive it is to be a buyer in this market, so you decide to end up staying put. So how did we end up here in this market? Well, I don't remember a whole lot from my days as an econ major at UCSB, sorry, Professor Rupert, but I do remember the law of supply and demand, and they have an inverse relationship, right? So the higher the supply, the lower the demand, the lower the supply, the higher demand. So let's look at some real-life applications of the law of supply and demand. Do we all remember the dark days of the pandemic when we were running out of toilet paper and everybody was lining up in Disneyland-sized lines to get toilet paper? That was a supply and demand issue. There was no toilet paper, people were panic buying, and what happened as a result? We started to see prices for toilet paper jack up. Okay, another application, the used car market. I have a beat up 20-year-old Toyota Tacoma, and people leave me notes on my windshield all the time asking to buy my Tacoma. I think it's actually worth more than what I paid for it at the time. So again, we have very low supply of used cars, very high demand. It ends up raising the prices even above those of home prices. So what about, let's look at the housing market here in Santa Barbara. I think it's important to note that inventory of homes has always been slim here in Santa Barbara. The old saying goes that you have the ocean on one side, the mountains on the other, all the houses are in between. So historically, we've had limited inventory, not a lot of space for new building or new construction. And demand has always been high for Santa Barbara because, well, it looks like this, and it's 70 degrees year-round, and it's beautiful. So now we're going to look at some charts and graphs because this is an economic forecast after all. Okay, so we'll start with supply or inventory. This graph takes us back to before the pandemic. So this is active listings March. Let's take a look at the green graph 2019. So we see in March of 2019, we had 624 active listings. Now look at March of 2022, 348 active listings. That's about half the amount of inventory that we have now that we had before the pandemic. Yet, as we all know, demand has increased. So what happens as a result of that? Prices skyrocketed. So again, let's take a look back to that green graph pre-pandemic. The median sales price for homes in Santa Barbara was $1,290,000. And then where are we at now in 2022? The median sales price here in Santa Barbara is $2,251,000. I like looking at this graph because this shows us basically an entire real estate cycle. So if we look back to 2005 through 2008, we all know that was the subprime mortgage bubble, topped out around 2008. Median sales price was about $1,200,000. And I remember working in that market, people saying, we'll never see those prices again. We all know what happened after that. Banks like Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns collapsed. And then by 2009, our market was flooded with distressed inventory, short sales, foreclosures, bank-owned properties. So we had all this new inventory, and people were panicking, freaking out. Nobody knew what was happening. We thought the sky was falling. So buyer demand was very limited. So again, high supply, low demand. We see what effect it had on the median sales price. And as we see, we eventually recovered out of that market, but like Peter said, nobody predicted what would happen during the pandemic in 2020. We all know inventory started to dry up, demand increased, and we see what happened with prices there. Okay, so this graph illustrates supply and demand again. This is year over year, 2021 to 2022. Active listings down 26%, new listings down 21%. Again, limited supply, high demand, median list prices up 15%. Okay, so what are some reasons why is inventory so low? Well, for one, we're just not seeing any new construction or new building. Like I mentioned before, in Santa Barbara, you got the ocean on one side, the mountains on the other side. There's just not a lot of space for new construction or new building. Another thing that we're noticing is people who would normally consider putting their homes on the market, they're very intimidated and don't think they can compete with the buyers in the market. So instead of putting their homes on the market, they're deciding to stay put. Maybe they're going to do those improvements on their home. They're going to finally get that ADU built. They're going to build their home office. Maybe they're going to put in the pool. And what effect that has is that's inventory that, again, would have normally come on the market that is no longer coming on the market. I think most of the inventory we're seeing nowadays are people who are either moving out of town, they're trustees who are selling estates for parents who passed away, or divorces. Okay, so we took a look at the supply side. Let's take a look at the demand side. And I think it's important to note that demand was already high before the pandemic. But probably one of the most critical things that affected demand here in our market is that people were allowed to work remotely or work from home. And what that means is that workers were no longer tethered to their physical offices in Silicon Valley or Seattle or Manhattan. They could essentially live and work from anywhere in the world. And maybe they had come to Santa Barbara at one point, fell in love, but now it was actually a reality that they could live here, work here, move here. And so what we started to see was buyers started coming here in droves. I think one of the studies I heard was that about 50% of our buyers are from out of the area right now. So it does beg the question to me, though. You know, these are nice places. I grew up in the Bay Area. I visited Manhattan a bunch. I love it. Why go through the struggle of uprooting your life, taking your kids out of school, leaving all your friends, and making this big move to Santa Barbara? So I did a little bit of research, and I found that in the Bay Area, for $1 million, you get a house that was literally just burned down. In 2020, a 2-alarm fire burned this house down. It got multiple offers, sold for $1 million. So that's crazy. Okay, what about in New York? Well, in Brooklyn, for $500,000, you get a 1-bedroom, that's about 300 square foot aluminum tin shed. So when you see things like this, it starts to make sense that, you know, buyers from these areas, they look at Santa Barbara and it looks like the best deal on earth because our real estate prices aren't that crazy to them. And they look at the Santa Barbara lifestyle. You got beaches, you got mountains, you got hiking trails. It's 70 degrees year round. You got convenience to shops and dining. And so again, it just starts to really make sense why there was so much increased buyer demand. I started to think about what are other reasons why we saw this influx of buyer demand. And another thing that came to my mind was there was a couple of pretty well-known people who ended up buying real estate during the pandemic, and their purchases didn't stay secret for too long. So I thought that this put a spotlight on Santa Barbara and maybe created an influx of buyers based on that. So I decided to talk to some agents who work in the luxury high-end market, and they actually didn't think that that was the case. Rather, they think that what it did was it just gave more credibility and validation to our area for people who were already considering making moves here because, again, these are people who could live anywhere in the world, and they decided to move here to Santa Barbara. Okay, so let's look at some real-life examples of sales in 2020. 1558 Marquardt Terrace. This is a home on the west side of Santa Barbara. 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom home, just over 1,000 square feet, approximately a quarter-acre lot, listed at $1,195,000. It sold for $1,775,000. That's about 50% over the asking price. They received 29 offers. They accepted an all-cash offer, no contingencies, 10-day close. Okay, now we're going to look at examples of homes that have sold twice during the pandemic. So 6290 Monmouth Ave, this is in Galeta near Lake Los Carneros. This is a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom home, fairly original condition, about 2,000 square feet, quarter-acre lot, sold in October 2021 for $1,275,000, which I will point out is pretty much in line with what homes in that neighborhood are selling for. So somebody bought it, did a very nice renovation to it, and in April, just about 6 months later, they sold it for $2,625,000. They put it on the market, they got 3 offers, they accepted a cash offer, no contingencies, 10-day close, and ended up selling for about 20% over the asking price. Okay, in the Upper East of Santa Barbara, 2428 Anacapa Street. This is a 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom home. Again, pretty original condition, almost 2,600 square feet, about a half-acre lot, sold in October of 2020 for $1,975,000. Same group that bought that house on Monmouth bought this house, did a very nice renovation, sold it in March for $4,650,000. They received 3 offers, accepted a cash offer, no contingencies, basically a slam dunk offer. Okay, let's look at the Samarkand neighborhood, 2921 Serena Road. This was a 3-bedroom, 1.5-bath home, about 1,800 square feet, had a little bit of a funky layout. It sold in August of 2019 for below the asking price, if you can believe that, for $912,000. This is back when you could buy a house for under $1 million here. Okay, fast forward to April of this year, it sold for $2,450,000. They did some nice renovations, addressed some of the layout issues. They got 3 offers, and it sold for 25% above the asking price. Okay, and let's look at our friends in Montecito. 851 Buena Vista. This was a modest 7-bedroom, 14-bathroom home consisting of a main house, guest house, and pool house, over 12,000 square feet total on about 2 acres of land. This sold in December 2020 for $13,250,000. Now I'm told that maybe they put $1 million or $2 million into that home, and they just sold it in March for $25 million. Quite a return on investment. Okay, so what are the takeaways here? Well, I think for one, it's very notable that we're noticing that buyers are willing to pay a premium for things that are new, remodeled, chic, move-in condition. They don't want to be bothered with doing any work. They want to move their bags in, unpack, and just be settled, and they will pay a premium for that. The other takeaway, to be a competitive buyer in this market, what do we have to do? Well, what we're seeing is buyers are offering 10 to 30% or even more above the asking price. They're waiving all of their due diligence contingencies, whether they get an inspection report or not. If they're getting a loan, a lot of buyers are waiving the appraisal contingency. And a lot of sellers are asking for a free 30 to 60-day rent back after the close of escrow. So if you want to be competitive, you're going to offer that. Some buyers are even offering an escalation clause, which looks something like this. We will offer $5,000 to $10,000 over the next highest offer that you get. So very much like an eBay type strategy. And the other takeaway, I can't say it enough, we need more inventory. So looking at the Samarkand Terrace example, they received 29 offers. Only 1 buyer got the home. So that leaves the other 28 buyers out there still looking for a home. So we need 28 more homes just like Samarkand Terrace to fulfill the buyer demand. So WTF? What's the forecast? I'm like Peter, I don't want to forecast because I'm guaranteed to be wrong, so I'm just going to give you some things to keep an eye on. Rising interest rates. This is obviously top of mind for people. I think the Fed just met this morning. So will this push some buyers out of the market? I think what we're seeing now is that instead of buyers exiting the market, they're just readjusting their search criteria. So buyers who were only looking for single-family homes, they're now considering condos and townhouses. Buyers who are only focused on Santa Barbara proper, they're looking in Galeta or Carpentry now. Okay, Goldman Sachs predicts a recession in 2023. They say it's a 38% chance of recession in 2023. So I think that we eventually will see a recession. I don't know when, I don't know how big or small, but it is part of the normal economic cycle. I think Professor Ruper addressed that. We need more supply, but we can't count on new construction, especially in an area like here, Santa Barbara. We're seeing this happening around the country. We have supply chain issues. The cost of building supplies are high, and we have a shortage of workers, of subcontractors. So will out-of-town buyers stop coming here once they get called back into the office? I hear this from a lot of people, a lot of my buyers specifically. I think it's a lot of wishful thinking. Everything that I'm reading says that remote work is here to stay. So I wouldn't count on the out-of-town buyers to come to a stop anytime soon. And will we see prices drop? I think that before we see that, we're going to start to see a leveling off of the market. Maybe we're seeing little signs of it now, where instead of seeing 15 offers, you're going to start seeing 10 offers, then 5 offers, then maybe a listing stays on the market for more than 10 days. So I think we'll see a little bit of that balancing out before we see prices start to drop. Did I bum everyone out in this room? Are they serving drinks upstairs? Thank you, everybody. I'm very pleased to introduce our next presenter. He's a fellow gaucho, a fellow business econ major, youngest partner at Radius Group, super dad, Gene Deering.
Thank you, David. Tough act to follow when he told each of you made about 100,000 or 500,000 on your home. So, but I like to give these talks more as a video tour. So what we're going to do is tour the market. This is the commercial market from Carpinteria to Galeta. We're going to look at some buildings, talk about some opportunities and some of the things that are going on in the marketplace. So with that, let's start the tour. And what a better place to start this tour than at the beautiful Granada. This is built in 1924. We're 12 blocks from the beach, and it's just an incredible building that was built before we had our height limit here, but it helps showcase, what a beautiful market we live in, why everyone wants to live here as we pan around Santa Barbara. But what it also shows us is that 12 blocks down to the beach, and State Street is now closed, so you have a lot of asphalt leading down to the beach, and if State Street's going to remain closed, we need to repurpose that street, and we need to do it in a way that happens quickly so we can take advantage of some of the momentum we have. And that's about repurposing retail buildings. We're flying over a perfect example, which was the Sachs building, became Amazon Tech Office. That's 46,000 feet of tech office, of retail that was converted to tech office, and we're going to continue to see that transition, and that transition is healthy for our street. Here's a look at a State Street promenade design RRM did. Couldn't agree with them more. Fountains, planting, we got to get rid of that asphalt and turn it into something that's exciting and engaging. So you want to bring your kids down there. There's something to do in that street space, and I think it's something we need to have happen, but it needs to happen relatively quickly. So then looking at a couple of opportunities. One big opportunity is the Nordstrom Building. So this building is on a land lease, so you're not going to see the building torn down and apartments built, but the second and third floors that were a department store are going to be converted to tech office. And Pralium is the owner of the improvements. They're doing the work. It's critical that we have that 90,000 square feet, second and third floor, now office space, get filled. And they're not looking for a 2,000 square foot tenant here or there. They're looking for 25, 50,000 square foot floor plates, which that's a Google, that's a Facebook, and this is what they're going to do. It's going to be beautiful, and hopefully that will encourage those tech tenants to come to downtown, because 90,000 square feet could mean 500 people working there each and every day, going to restaurants, going to shops, and that's one of those inflection points in our market that hopefully can happen. They're planning to be done in about 2024, so one important piece to keep an eye on. Now there's another building very similar to that, very close by, doing the same thing. So that's the Macy's space. Again, a critical building where the second and third floors, about 90,000 square feet of new tech office. They're looking for $345 gross, so a pretty healthy rent, and there's going to be times when that developer is in the market or that prospective tenant is out looking at space, and we have a couple headwinds that we have to get by with those tenants and keep State Street on the right path, and one of those headwinds is the homeless issue. It's a reality that's out there. It's a complex issue. We don't have an easy solution for it, but it needs to be addressed so each and every one in this room feels safe and comfortable going out and having dinner in downtown, and some of those big tenants or big developers who are going to take a big risk, and we need to make sure that we can give them everything they need to succeed and come here to our town. So those are kind of two critical buildings. Here's the inside of the Macy's space. Again, bring in light, make it fun, make it cool. These owners are going to do what they need to rebrand those spaces. We just, as a brokerage community and as a community as a whole, need to make sure those are filled, because those are too big a holes to sit in our downtown space for a long period of time. So that's kind of what I see as two building opportunities. And now I want to look at Santa Barbara office vacancy. You look at this 30-year history, 9.7%. This is a little deceiving because that includes 180,000 feet of new tech office that was just added to the supply. So really it's closer to 8%. Big picture, with COVID, with all this transition, we're doing pretty well to be stabilized at 8%. There's a lot of markets that would like to have that number associated with their vacancy. Now let's go on down to the street. This is the 900 block. 900 block doesn't have a lot of restaurants, parklets, so it can be quiet. You see a lot of asphalt. You could go there on a Tuesday afternoon, not much going on. We need to help those retailers. If the street is going to stay closed, we need to convert that street into something that's a little more exciting. The 900 block might have the best retailer in the world. Apple is the middle of the block. So again, we have good things down there. We just need to make it more fun, make sure David's taking TikTok videos down there with cool design and sort of make a splash that's fun and that's interactive. One more open space. Again, I sort of pose this as the opportunity for the city in terms of De La Guerra Plaza. We need to make sure it's not just Fiesta and Farmers Market, but this space is activated with events and fun happening on a monthly and a weekly basis, just because it's the heart of our town. And you look at the News Press building, hopefully that'll be a little more heavily utilized in the future, because we need those empty buildings full of activity. All right, so now let's dig into State Street retail vacancy. This is Gutierrez to Victoria, 16% of the storefronts vacant. So again, we've come through COVID and we've done pretty well. So we have some projects in the pipeline. Can we get this line to trend down over the next 12 to 18 months, get to 12, 10%? I think we can, because we're starting in an okay spot, and I think the community is now paying more attention to State Street, which is important. All right, so in our market, on the hospitality side, in a typical year, we might not see any hotels trade, or we might see one hotel trade every 3 years, and this last 18 months is anything but that. Hotel Santa Barbara, 75 keys, sold for $41 million to the Hendricks Group, $558 a key, plus the retail down below. They're going to upgrade the hotel, and that'll be a good thing for State Street. You can see the 500 block. 500 block's done incredibly well with closed State Street, the parklets. Right across the street, 524 State, was the Church of Scientology. That's becoming the Drift Hotel, 46 hotel rooms with coffee and cocktails downstairs. And that's another example of this repurposing of retail space into something that's fun and interactive. And I think it's a great design, and look forward to this project, which could be sort of the end of this year. Now we have to talk about housing. We need housing downtown. There's a demand. Big project in the works is the 84 units behind the former Staples that Peter Lewis is doing. The Staples building will kind of be like a public market type space with units behind, and this is what we need downtown. This is a look at the building. 84 units, that's families, that's workers walking to dinner, walking on State Street, and it's locals supporting State Street. And finally, one last open space. I'm the son of a landscape architect. This underpass, it doesn't smell great, it doesn't feel great. There's all this funk zone energy, and we need all those people to feel comfortable walking up to downtown, and getting this project done and done right, I think, is important to grab some of that funk zone energy and bring it to downtown. So continuing down toward the beach, hospitality, so much money chasing these deals. The Waterman Hotel, currently in escrow, offer deadline a couple weeks ago, multiple offers on that property. And as David was saying, when you have multiple offers, there's a bunch of groups that lost out that are still looking. Across the street, the old Fish Enterprise, that building being converted to tech office. So that's another example of this retail stock that's being trimmed down by this conversion, and it's a great, healthy thing for our street. Across the street, Hotel Indigo, sold the end of last year, $19 million, multiple offers, $457 a key, and that's right next to another creative, interactive retail, which is the Moxie building. So that building, if you have kids, great draw, great project. And then the biggest hotel of all, or hotel deal from last year, the Californian, 121 rooms plus retail traded, and Bill Foley bought it, another local who can plug in some of his businesses and the synergy he has in his kind of empire. So it's a good thing to see that hotel doing so well. And then another big hotel sale, the Franciscan, $22 million, 53 keys. This is in West Beach. And when we were meeting with the owners to talk about bringing the hotel to market, I had to share with them a photo that was taken of my wife and I sort of leaving our wedding, and we were headed back to the Franciscan. And if you've ever ridden a bike with a wedding dress and chains, it's hard to do. I wouldn't recommend it. We got most of the way there. From the Franciscan, talking about the funk zone. So this is the corner of Yananali and Garden. A developer brought the rock quarry, that corner, 3 acres, and they're going to do high-end retail. So you're going to see the funk zone sort of jump over Garden Street for the first time as that energy and excitement moves that direction. Also on Garden, if you drive from Garden, the freeway, to the beach, you go by 4.5 acres. That's kind of container storage. That's entitled for 250 key hotel. So not only is there demand for existing hospitality, there's also demand to build more units, and there's a lot of hospitality projects in the pipeline, and we're going to see more supply arrive. Out in Galeta, hotel demand is great there as well. You've got Pacifica Suites, 87 keys, 27 million, and we saw this building trade last year, and group is going to renovate the building, and you're going to continue to see our hospitality assets updated and upgraded because that demand is so great. Jump over the freeway, out in Galeta, the old Goodland, 33 million, 160 keys, 206,000 a key, hospitality demand. These are big numbers, and this is 9 hotel sales in 18 months when we're used to having one. They the seller did kind of a Palm Springs renovation. I thought they did a great job with that. So bed tax, let's look pre-COVID 2019 versus recent months. You can just see what that revenue looks like, and this is what hotel developers and investors love seeing, is that hotel demand is more than we can meet. And if any of you or your friends have tried to get a hotel room here, you can understand why they're so excited about the asset class. So now let's take the drone and we'll go up by Lacumbra Plaza. On the left, you can see the Mark. That was 89 apartment units. That was built, successful project, and that's the type of project we need to get the doorknobs built and done in this town. And a big opportunity is Lacumbra Plaza. So the Macy's site and the neighboring retail sold last year, 64 million. That's a big number for our market, and that investor, hopefully they're going to do hospitality and a lot of residential, because this is a great site to add that demand that David mentioned. Then the Sears parcel, there's some CC&Rs there. You're going to see some 7-year leases. When those leases are up, you may see that become residential as well, and that's something we need, and that's a great site for it. So keep an eye on that. Nothing will happen quickly there, but some good things in the works. All right, so moving from hospitality, now let's look at industrial. You look at this building, it's got a lot of roll-up doors. This is what everyone wants. Whether you're a tenant who needs industrial space, you're an investor, or a banker, if you have a roll-up door, your building is full, your rents are up. We just do not have enough industrial product, and we're seeing industrial rates increase above office in some cases because the demand is so high for industrial. Also, we have a new market segment that's going after this industrial. And this is the man cave or the she shed. This is the person who just bought the $10 million house, doesn't have enough room for their car collection, personal storage, and they're buying up small industrial buildings and they're renting property for personal storage they want near their new big house, and it's making that industrial market even hotter, and it's something we didn't see coming, and you'll see these numbers that don't make sense because for that group, money's less of an issue. It's about being close to home so I can go work on my cars or hang out with my friends right near my new house. So industrial vacancy, not a typo, same as you've seen over the years, less than 1%. We don't have enough industrial product. If you call your plumber and they drive from Oxnard because that's where their shop is, that's where their storage is, this is the reason. They can't find anything here locally, and we don't have new industrial in the pipeline, so that's just going to stay the way it is. Out in Galeta, big sale closed last month. Bolay, this is right next to Home Depot. $50 million deals, big for our market, $260 a foot. And one of the reasons this property may have sold was this building, which is 38,000 feet, needed to be totally redone. Cost of construction right now, redoing a building like that, you could pay close to that $260 a foot to trick the space out. That owner elected to sell. Big deal out on Los Caneros, Appeal, great local company. They leased this building. The group that sold Pacifica Suites exchanged into this, $36 million, 5.4 cap. That investor's probably pretty happy because net leased buildings like this are hard to find, and having a good tenant is always a great thing. Another investor took a risk at the Cabrillo Business Park. This is right behind Deckers, bought 4 entitled buildings, started building the buildings, leased them all. Inogen took a lot of space, Montecito Bank and Trust, and then a confidential tenant. So this was a case of, would the market pay new high rents for new product that's ultra efficient and better designed than 90s construction, 70s construction, and the market proved that it did want new product. And here you've got roll-up doors in the back, and that owner's probably pretty happy with their investment, getting all that space filled. Let's look at Galeta office vacancy, 6.1%. Again, pretty good. No real COVID change. This is one to keep an eye on because a lot of those tech companies, they're paying rent, they're making money, but there aren't people in the office. When those leases roll, are they going to renew leases? Are they coming back to the office? So we could see a COVID change that's 2 years out. That remains to be seen. Galeta Industrial, same story as Santa Barbara. No supply, 3.5% vacancy, and a lot of our industrial product is low ceilings. You go down to Oxnard, you get a much better building, but it's not close by, and you're going to continue to see that demand very high. Another cool opportunity, building to keep an eye on. Everyone drives by this really often. This is in Summerlin. This is the Qad Campus, a 29-acre hilltop with 120,000 square feet of space. Had an offer deadline last week. Multiple offers on this property. Will this be a billionaire take it for a house? Will a new tech company come to town? Because when else can you buy a facility like this? But there's not a lot of product like this in California, and it doesn't trade very often, so you could see a number just below 100 million on something this cool and creative, because it's a real spectacular campus that most of us aren't familiar with because we're just driving by and don't see it on top of the hill. Rounding out our numbers, Carpentry Industrial vacancy, same thing, nothing out there. You have a roll-up door, you have high rent, you have a strong building value, and you're feeling good because no new product coming on the industrial side. We'll look at Carpentry office vacancy. This is up a little bit. That market is very small, so one building comes available. These numbers can fluctuate quite a bit, but that market will go as Procore and Newsel and Amazon go out there. So big picture, COVID's come. We've looked at all the vacancies. Not a lot's changed. We've handled it pretty well, and it'll be interesting what happens the next 12 to 18 months. But we're pretty well positioned. For downtown, opportunities be in the outside space. How do we make that space cool as can be? And it's important we do it and we get it right. Nordstrom Macy's downtown, can we get that filled with tech users? Other question, interest rates. So the 10-year was at about 3% this morning. We haven't yet seen comps come through at a lower value because of interest rates, but that may be coming, so one to keep an eye on. And then finally, I want to thank Justin Diem from our office, who helped with the drone footage and the State Street info, and just want to say thanks everyone for coming.
Good morning. It's exciting to be back. I've been doing Zoom meetings for 2 years, so it's great to see people and be able to talk to them. I will say I'm a little scared. I feel like I'm back in high school. We had the cool professor on. We had the cool kids showing TikTok videos and drone visuals, and now you're going to get the research nerd that's going to inundate you with lots of data. So apologize in advance, but it's that time. I want to do a few things today. I want to talk about. You're going to hear a new acronym, LFPR, labor force participation rates. Really, what are we talking about? We're talking about the availability of talent, the availability of workers. And really, they're key for driving, kind of the economic resilience and recovery of the county. We're going to start with kind of the foundation, what it is, why it matters. We're going to look at some national data, but most importantly, we're going to dig down and we're going to really show what's happening in Santa Barbara County as it relates to this. So I will say this is county-wide data. We do some splits. We all know Santa Barbara South and North regions are different, and we'll talk about that a little bit as well. This is a forecast, but I will continue with a theme that I'm scared of forecasts. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we think is next, but I'll let you kind of decide that moving forward. So with that, this is my favorite slide and nobody else's favorite slide, but I do want you to know kind of how we gathered this data. So there is a lot of data, that we look at nationally, even internationally, to understand kind of the labor market and how that's evolving. We did do a survey of adult residents in the county, over 600. Our margin of error there is about 4%, with a 95% level of confidence. And then we also did a business survey with just over 100 businesses in the county. So we kind of pulled all those different kind of data sets together to give you this picture. Again, there's a specific equation for the LFPR, and really what it is it's how many people are able and willing to work. We typically relied on the unemployment rate to tell us kind of how economic vitality is. In this new tight labor market, unemployment rate is going to be less useful. There are people that have dropped out of the workforce. There are people that aren't looking for jobs. So we really want to know, and what LFPR tells us is what is the percentage of the adult population that is willing and able to work. We'll hit on some other issues like underemployment and job quality, but all of these are part of this basic assessment of how tight the labor market is and how hard it is for businesses and employers to find the workers and the talent they need. So why is this important? And I've already kind of hit on it a little bit. I'm going to jump over here. I think everybody can still hear me. Fundamentally, it's about economic resilience and recovery. Talent and the ability to find workers is, if not the primary, it's one of the primary drivers of how well we're going to grow our economy and our economic vitality. This dependency ratio is something you'll hear in academic circles, but really gives you a sense of that ratio between those people that are really generating, tax revenue for your community, for the county, for the state, versus those that are really dependent on some of those benefits. But lastly, and I should say this study was we partnered with, was funded by the Workforce Development Board of Santa Barbara County, a key partner. And one of the areas that they're really looking at is how do we keep talent productive? When people drop out of the workforce, if they're not getting specific training, if they're not getting education, they tend to lose their productivity and their ability to contribute on the economy. So all of these issues are things why we're going to spend more time looking at kind of labor force availability and participation. So with that, one of the things, and I already told Peter this, there's a narrative going around that young people are dropping out of the workforce. That's the problem. It's not really true. The reality is our labor force participation rate from 18 to 24 nationally has kind of fully recovered since the pandemic. It's not true. It's about a half percentage point down. But the reality is you're not seeing a much smaller portion of young people working. What you're seeing now is those young people know that they have market power. And so they're not taking that job that's paying minimum wage. They're not taking those jobs that they feel like they don't have a future in. We actually have some data that we'll talk about from Santa Barbara County specifically that really leads to that. The reason the labor force participation rate is largely down is kind of for two reasons. One, our population is getting older. Our median age is getting older. And the primary working age is kind of that 25 to 54 age group, right? As more people move out of that, less people are going to work. But then we've seen a real decline in immigration since the pandemic, and those kind of new young workers from immigration we don't have. So those are really why the labor force participation rate is down. I will say too, one of the other things is I hear, it's affecting all industries, it's affecting all regions. The reality is it's not. in Santa Barbara County, it's a real problem. Coastal communities in California, the areas that I'm doing this research are Monterey, San Diego, Orange County, the places that tend to have higher housing rates, and we heard a lot about that, right? And that's really driving it. But that labor availability is really being driven by that. And there's a very different experience depending on what industry you're in and really what region you're in. And then one of the other things too is that this is really all driven by the pandemic. And that's not true. Really what's driving the labor force conversation are really a few factors. Pandemic had a catalyst and impacted it for about 12 to 18 months, but really what you're seeing that demographic change, the graying of the population. You're seeing greater disconnect in terms of availability of work based on your educational attainment. So that's another key variable in terms of people's willingness to work is how educated they are. And then it's also the changing of industries and where jobs are available. And the kind of automation and technology and trade. So what are the drivers? And we've just talked about them. The demographics is key. That ratio between kind of 26 or 25 to 54 and your other population. And one of the things we know about Santa Barbara County, particularly South Santa Barbara County, has a relatively high population of individuals over the age of 55, and it has a relatively high population of individuals under the age of 18, kids. Right? And so from a workforce perspective, that's a challenge because those tend to be your age cohorts that are least likely to work. The demand for different skills have evolved. I mean, one of the things that we've seen over the last 30 years is lower educated men who used to work in manufacturing, their participation rates have gone down. Whereas women, particularly more educated women, their participation rates have really gone up. And some of that's about kind of the technology and automation, but some of it's also around the culture around work and some of the support mechanisms that are available in terms of childcare and things of that nature. The economic environment is also another key. The perception of economic opportunity and economic mobility may support that. This is an important chart because I think one of the things, and like I said, we hear, oh, people don't want to work anymore, that's changing. You can see the top line, that gray line, that's 82%, that's your primary working age, right? 82%, more than 4 out of 5 individuals between the ages of 25 to 54 are working, and it hasn't really changed the last 10 years. And you can see at the bottom, right, that 19%, 20%, that hasn't changed. It's actually, to be honest, that the 55 to 64 has actually gone up. They're working more than they were 10 years ago. And even the 65 plus is working a little bit more as well. So old people are working more. Younger people, 18 to 24, are working a little less. But the main reason is they're going back to school and they're working in school longer. Makes sense given that the payouts on education are getting higher, right? I know there's a lot of UCSB kind of leaders and administrators. I think they understand why individuals are working less at 19 and going to college and university more. This is another one, though. And this one, the first one I think everybody knew. Everybody knew that, where your age is has an impact on your likeliness to work. I think this other one tends to be a little more surprise. You can see the bottom line is educational attainment. And this is for adults 25 and older. If you have less than a high school diploma, only about less than half of those individuals are working. If you have a bachelor's degree or higher, 3/4 of those individuals are working. It's almost twice as much. So educational attainment is the other really key driver to how willing people are to work and really join and be involved in the workforce. We did do some international research. I'm already getting behind. I'm looking at my time. So I will say the report shows a lot of some of the international research. Real quick, demography is important, but there are, that drives workforce availability, but there are both immigration programs and actually support programs that can support increased labor force participation. Active labor market programs work, and automation and returns on education have had an impact on labor force participation. So let's talk about Santa Barbara County. I think this is probably where we want to be. Now, one of the things that we can look at over the last 10 years, and to be honest, if I go over the last 20 years, labor force participation rates in Santa Barbara County have always been a little bit lower than the national average. That has created a challenge. This has always been a little bit tighter labor market than kind of the nation or the state as a whole. But it's becoming particularly problematic now as the nation's gone down and we're still below that average. And one of the challenges you have is you have kind of a bifurcated adult residents. You have a relatively high percentage that are more educated, that have a 4-year degree or lower. You don't have as much in the middle, and then you have a relatively high percentage of residents that have less than a high school diploma. This is adults, again, 25 and older. And again, we know that bottom group, that low educational attainment cohort, is much less likely to work. or even be looking for work. And again, the other challenge is again, that primary working age, that 25 to 54, 25 to 65, that cohort is declining in the county. Again, so that primary working group is declining in the county, and your seniors, your 65 plus are growing. And over the last 10 years, they've gone from about 13% to about 15%. The demographic forecasts that I've seen expect that trend to continue, which means this tight labor market that we're seeing right now, based at least on the demographics, are not likely to change anytime in the near future. So I think it's important that we look at averages, and we know when we look at averages, sometimes we miss some things. And so what we did is we kind of broke out your adult population into 4 groups, right? Just over half of your adult residents are what we would fall under that consistent worker. And they worked before the pandemic, they worked during the pandemic, and they're working now, and they're workers. They haven't changed really what they're doing, and that represents just a little over half. About 1 in 5 are non-workers. These are adults that weren't working before, they weren't working during, and they're not working now. And just to be clear, this survey data is about 2 months old. And then you have about 1 in 6 that were job changers. These are individuals that changed their job over the last 24 months and are kind of most of them are looking for better pay, looking for better opportunities. And then you did have about 1 in 8 that dropped out, that just dropped out over the last 24 months from working, and they're starting to come back slowly. So consistent workers, non-workers, job changers, and job droppers. One of the interesting things, your consistent workers, again, so this data, the data I was showing you before was for U.S., when I was talking about those age cohorts. This is Santa Barbara County specific, right? Almost two-thirds of your consistent workers fall within that age group of 26 to 55. That age group only represents 1/3 of your residents, but it represents 2/3 of your consistent workers. That group also tends to be, not surprisingly, more educated. Over half have at least a 4-year degree. More than 1 in 5 have a graduate degree or something beyond a BA or a BS. Non-workers. Non-workers, half of them are over retirement age, 65 and older, and then you can see them kind of a small kind of cohort from each of the other age categories. Your non-workers actually surprisingly tend to be more educated, and I think that's just a function of you have a lot of retired people that are more educated. And then again, we look at why they're not working. 3 out of 4 or 3 out of 5, it's they're retired. There is a portion of these non-workers that will come back to work, a relatively small portion, but we expect over the next 12 to 24 months, some of them will come back to work. Job changers, and these are probably in some ways the most interesting group. Almost 70% are actually over 70% of them are really in that 18 to 35, right? These are people that want to live in Santa Barbara and are trying to figure it out. And you can see their educational attainment tends to be, in those middle groups. They have a high school diploma, but less than 40% have their 4-year degree or more. And you can see too, they tend to be on the lower spectrum of the household income category, which is consistent with their age profile. The challenges they have, are really twofold. It's finding the career they're interested in, it's getting the right degree or educational background, and then it's just finding the employment opportunities. So the challenge they're finding in terms of the work, and part of the reason why they're moving. What are the things they're looking for? They're looking for better pay or benefits, not surprising. But one of the other things that I found interesting is that almost 1/3 are looking for better company culture. And these are people that are working, or at least have been working in the last 24 months, that are still, likely to change. And that quit rate that Professor Ruper talked about before this is the group that's really moving and changing. I think one of the things we found in the surveys, and this is interesting, I wish we could have done the survey kind of 3 years ago, kind of before the pandemic. I know hindsight's 2020, but we saw more than 2 out of 3 of these job changers indicated they are no longer willing to work in a job that they don't see a good future in. And what does that tell you? That tells you that this group knows that it's a tight labor market and knows they have a little bit of power and they have options, right? They know that the unemployment rate is below 5% and that employers need job applicants. But again, the challenge of Santa Barbara, rent and housing costs. It's getting harder to live and work in Santa Barbara. Childcare is really important, particularly, not surprising, for women, in this group between the age of, 24 and 34. And so I think even though the childcare number is only 32%, it was a primary reason for that group. Job droppers are individuals that, again, were working before and dropped out. they are starting to look for work again, and I do expect this group to come back to work relatively quickly in the next 6 to 12 months. You can see they tend to fall into two groups. Again, they're that 26 to 35 and that 56 to 64, kind of just pre-retirement ages. That's where most of them are. Tend to be in the middle in terms of educational attainment. And their reasons for unemployment are, why are for different reasons, and we'll look at that. But a lot of them is they're not able to find the jobs really that they want and that works within their location. One of the things the international research showed that's really important is the more we can do kind of job matching and improve the kind of connectivity, and even in Santa Barbara we see digital literacy and just teaching people how to find work in their area could be valuable. This group does expect to return to work. 2/3 of them said they do expect to return to work sometime. They're not sure when, and you can see these responses. There is a portion of them, though, that will be leaving Santa Barbara. And I think the primary reason is the housing conversations that were had earlier today. Again, this group is even stronger. Almost 4 out of 5 said, I'm no longer to work in a job that I don't feel like I have a good future in. And 3 out of 5 said the pandemic has definitely made it harder for them to live and work in Santa Barbara County. And then again, we're talking about rent and housing costs, and then also finding the right career pathway that allows them to live and work in the community. These are some of the challenges that this group faces. So I've talked really fast and give you a lot of information. There's a report with lots of information, so I've skipped over some of the details. I apologize. Again, I don't want to say this is a forecast, but there are some things we know about the future. So let's talk about what we think we know. Santa Barbara County residents will continue to slowly come back to work. Those job droppers and the job changers, more of them will come back to work. But people will relocate and find a new relationship between work and where they live. I think one of the things you see a very disparate kind of impact if you talk to the employer. If you talk to an employer in hospitality, retail, healthcare, they're having a really hard time finding workers because most of those jobs require people to be in there, to be in person. There's face-to-face issues, but it's also a lot of those positions don't pay as much, right? And we're in an expensive area. But if you talk to individuals in like information communication technologies, in software, in life sciences, they're having a much easier time finding the workers they need. And those jobs tend to be, they remote, they have more flexibility, they have higher pay. So this isn't the same thing for all employers. Job changers and droppers will continue to look for employment opportunities, but again, they need to feel like they have a future. And company culture and career pathways, all those things matter. Businesses do expect to grow. Over the next 12 months, the employers, the current businesses, think that they'll increase employment by about 8%. But for a quarter of them, finding and paying workers is going to be a challenge. For about 75% of them, 3 out of 4, they're going to have some challenge finding the workers they need. I will say about 1 in 20 businesses are looking to move offices, but they're not necessarily. Our expectation is that we would see businesses that want to move to smaller offices, more remote work. I don't think that's the case in Santa Barbara County now. Now, again, ask me again in 12 months and that could change, but I think right now you're not going to see a lot of the big offices demand for them go away. As a matter of fact, I think there could actually be increased demand for office space. This is probably the most important slide, and of course I have the last 90 seconds to talk about it. But again, this is the challenge to you, to the decision makers of Santa Barbara County, to the Workforce Development Board, to the universities and the colleges. What do we do? How do we deal with this shrinking labor force ability, this tight labor market? And I'll be honest, if there's one thing you take away, this is not a problem that's going to go away with the pandemic, right? It's really not a pandemic problem. It's a demographic, it's an educational attainment, and it's the way, the type of industries that we have in our county. We really need to educate current and potential workers on higher paying career pathways. And one of the terms that's kind of used in the workforce world is kind of career lattices. How do we take people that are working in hotels and put them on sales and service jobs that allow them to make enough money to live and work in the county? We need to identify those and really educate young workers, these job changers and job droppers, on those opportunities. We need to really look at support programs that, and there's some of them already there, but we need to expand opportunity to increase digital literacy and online job searching skills. One of the challenges is in your lowest income households in Santa Barbara County, 1 in 4 don't have online access at home. They don't have internet access in the house. Think about the challenges that creates to be able to find jobs, to be able to get education, to all of that. So increasing broadband access, but also increasing the ability to kind of look for and connect with potential employers online is an important skill. These are some great solutions that we can talk about that you're going to figure out. I'm just going to offer some solutions. Housing and educational attainment, both of those are really important for the county. So you got your 20-minute or 50-minute presentation in 20 minutes. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. There we go.
Thanks, great. I'm back. So I've given this talk a few times around town, and my view of the Economic Forecast Project has always been we want to provide information and analysis to give people the information they need to make good decisions. And I mean everybody, businesses, homeowners, especially policymakers in town. And I usually don't like to give the same talk twice, but I don't think it's sinking in yet. So I'm going to have to give it again. I call it rent control. I think the new euphemism is rent stabilization. Whatever, it's price controls, right? That's what they're doing. I want to explain that as we start to see housing prices increase, and by the way, this is not just in Santa Barbara, it's all over the place. As housing prices go up and rents go up, people want to help those people who can't really afford to live in a certain place. And I think we all agree with that. There's individuals who need some help to be able to live here, to work in restaurants or fire department, whatever. There are some benefits, of course, to rent control. Those people who live in them, they get a little benefit, that the fact that rents can't go up by very much, so that's going to be a benefit. So we have to weigh those benefits against the entire cost, and I'm going to go through some of those costs now, and hopefully when when I finish, you will write to your council members and say, we've got to think of a better solution. So that's my goal. Thanks. So this comes from Gunnar Myrdal. So Gunnar Myrdal, he won the Nobel Prize in 1974. He won it alongside another economist who basically was the opposite. Gunnar Myrdal is a person who many people believed was the architect of the Swedish socialist system. So he's as far left as anybody could ever be on the planet, I think. And he wrote this: rent control has, in certain Western countries, constituted maybe the worst example of poor planning by governments lacking courage and vision. So we'll come back to what that means, courage and vision, about what's going to go on. My view of that is vision means, and by the way, I was very proud to see David and Jean, economics grads, be able to talk a little bit about economics, so I'll do that. But what does vision mean? It means what you learn, I think, in economics is kind of how to think about what's going to happen, what people call unintended consequences. And my belief of policymakers when they say, oh my God, unintended consequences, I'm like, you just didn't think through the problem, did you? You slapped something on there and you didn't really think what's going to happen. So I want to show you what's going to happen. So another famous economist, Assar Lindbeck, also Swedish, also on the left. In many cases, rent control appears to be the most efficient technique presently known to destroy a city, except for bombing. By the way, these slides will be up on the Forecast Project site, so you can go to the Economic Forecast Project. These are all links, so all these things in orange are links that you can go to. And this is a book written in 1981 that I'm going to mention. I really recommend reading it. It's studies of about 6 countries who imposed rent controls and the things that happened afterwards. Milton Friedman and Hayek are in there, as well as people on the left. So this is one of those things that crosses left-wing, right-wing political stance. This is just something you have to really be aware of. So I really recommend looking through that book. So the interesting thing about this book, by the way, is every chapter starts with a picture like this. Bomb damage or rent control, see page 321 for the answer. Yeah, so you have to guess. This one actually is the South Bronx in New York. That's what these buildings look like, and many attribute it to the rent controls that we had during those times. Super simple economics. Even real estate people can understand it, like David. I'm really proud that he put up the supply and demand graph. I'm going to make it a little more complicated, but just a little. So supply curve, obviously, as prices go up, people are willing to provide more of it. If you get more rent for your houses, you're willing to build more houses, for example. The demand curve slopes down. On the vertical axis here is the rent. I'm going to use a particular case for apartment rents, but this works for almost anything. And on the horizontal axis is the number of apartments available. So the demand. Obviously, as the rents go up, people demand less apartments. They just can't afford it. So that's why the demand curve slopes down. By the way, as you all know, the joke's about economists that they can't agree on anything. There's very little disagreement about demand curve sloping down. There's just very little disagreement about that. You make something more expensive, people do less of it. And we see it time and time again. So that's on the horizontal axis. So this, as David showed, we're going to have some equilibrium that comes at the intersection of supply and demand. What that means is that this will be the rent that would be imposed in an unfettered market. That is, if there's no interference, that would be the rent. How many apartments would there be? Well, it would be this number, QE. Interesting to note here, there is no housing shortage. The number of apartments available exactly equals the number of apartments demanded. And that's what equilibrium means in economics. There's no excess demand, there's no excess supply. So now somebody, I don't know who, somebody says, you know what, RE is too high. And it may be too high for certain people, that's true. So what they do is they say, let's control the rent, let's put it here. And by the way, this works for growth as well as the level of rent, so that doesn't matter. So what happens when you institute a rent of RC, that people can't charge a rent more than that? A bunch of things happen, by the way. So first of all, you can see, because the demand curve sloped down, more people want to live there. Well, that's kind of the idea, right? That we want people to be able to live there. The problem is that when the rent is only RC, the number of apartments willing to be supplied by landlords is QS. What we've done is we have created an apartment shortage when no shortage existed before. Now, what you might say is we wanted more people to live there, fine. But that's only part of it. There's another part that sort of people don't understand, and that is we went from QE apartments to QS apartments. What that means is we've lost some apartments. We've lost some supply. You can say, well, how the hell can we lose supply of apartments? Well, there's lots of ways. I know what you're saying now, Mr. Professor Economist. You think you know everything, and you've got some stupid theory up here. Does it actually work? Do we really see this happening in the real world, where we put rent control on and there's fewer apartments available and there's a bigger shortage? That book I just showed you, that's what it's about. So I'm going to give you an example from Sweden. Again, very leftish. This is, by the way, just so you know, most rent controls started after World War II. That's when they kind of started, and the reason was that some cities were bombed out, military were returning, they didn't want landlords to gouge rents, so they put these things on, and if you look at all of the codes from the 1940s, they said it's a temporary control. Many of these temporary controls, by the way, were 30 or 40 years long, but I can tell you now, almost every city that implemented rent control got rid of it. So let's look at this example from Sweden. So this comes from, as you can see, the Dwelling Exchange Office in Sweden. The way it works back in the 40s, if you had an apartment available, you had to list it with the government. If you were looking, you had to apply through the government. So we know how many apartments were available, we know how many people were applying. So in 1940, before rent control was imposed, there was 1,000, by the way, this is in Malmö, Sweden. There were 1,144 apartments available. How many vacancies? There were 58 people without a dwelling. Go forward, 41, there was no rent control, 1,047 apartments available. Rent control is imposed in 1942. The year it's imposed, what happens? Only 593 vacancies. Go the next year, 165, 44, 41, 22, 8, 48, 49, 50, 60, 70, 0. There were no vacant apartments available. How many people were looking? Thousands. Thousands. How long did it take to get an apartment? Well, you go forward. In 1950, it took 9 months, 24 months. By 1958, 40 months to get an apartment. So these people were without homes. So the answer is, yeah, economics actually works. Crazy, right? It does. So the idea is, no matter what the motivation, and the motivation is always the same, we want to help those people who can't afford to live here. You saw these guys. It turns out, I can't even afford to live here, right? No one can afford to live here. Super expensive. Santa Barbara is never going to be affordable in the sense that we want it to be affordable. So we need to figure out ways to get people we want that need to live here to be able to live here. But no matter what the motivation for the implementation, we see the following things. Housing deterioration. I showed you the picture of the bombed out looking building from South Bronx. Haphazard income redistribution. Once we decide we want to redistribute income, for example, we do it with food stamps, we do it with temporary assistance for needy families, all kinds of different programs we do to redistribute income. Once we decide that, let's do it the right way. So if you thought about this just quickly, so rent control would mean, what? Landlords are going to get less, poor residents are going to get more, so that's a redistribution of income from landlords to the tenants, because landlords can't get the rent that they would get otherwise. It turns out that in most studies we find it's the opposite. The rich benefit more than the poor people. That happens in Boston, it happened in lots of different places, and I've got studies to show you that. These aren't my studies. Racial discrimination. It turns out that over a few years, it turns out that minorities move out at the end of the day, and these cities become more gentrified. Again, that's been studied many different times. Tax base loss. Well, if rents can't go up the way they should go up, you're not getting the tax revenue you could from property taxes. Reduction in labor mobility. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. Some people should be moving to other jobs, other locations, but instead they're going to stick in that place. And it's true, they do stick in the place longer. And I showed you with that very, very simple economics graph that we get a worsening of the housing shortage, not an improvement. Okay? So who actually lives in rent-controlled apartments? Well, famous story about Ed Koch, the mayor from New York, who, when he moved into Gracie Mansion, he kept his rent-controlled apartment in Greenwich Village. He hardly ever went there, but he said, why should I pay high rent if I'm not going there? This was an unused space. There's a huge thing which is called a misallocation of resources. That misallocation is we have people who maybe had a family, they're living in a 3-bedroom place, the kids move out, they get divorced or one of them dies. They're now living in a 3-bedroom place by themselves when there's a much higher need for a family of 2 or 3 to move into that place. So there's a big misallocation of resources that's not trivial. Mia Farrow, she lived in a rent-controlled apartment for 20 or 30 years. It's one of these things, again, unintended consequences. Well, New York then had to pass a law that said, oh, anybody who makes over $500,000 a year can't live in a rent-controlled apartment. So they had to pass extra laws to do that, right? So we want to make sure those people who we want to be living in those places are actually living in them. So maybe you don't like that book I showed you. Many of you like Freakonomics. You've probably heard the podcast Freakonomics. Rebecca Diamond from Stanford did a study of rent control in San Francisco in 1994. That link there, you can go hear it, but here's what the host says. You find evidence that rent control increases gentrification, one component of which is the displacement of low-income tenants. So it's not helping those people that we started to help in the beginning. Yes, people do stay in there longer, and there's some benefits to that, some cost to that, as I already mentioned. Landlords treated by rent control reduce rental housing supply by 15%. I just showed you that thing from Sweden. So yes, this happens. There's a decrease in the number of apartments. What's happening? People are converting their apartments to condos, for example, which happened in Beverly Hills, which has had rent control for 40 years. By the way, Beverly Hills has become more gentrified. And secondly, once, again, unintended consequences, they put on rent control, people started converting their apartments to condos. Then Beverly Hills had to pass a rule saying only some number of apartments could be converted in any 1 year. So they stopped people from converting. And you've got to go through the list of things you're going to have to do once you impose something like a price control. By the way, not all apartments were under rent control, and because of the decrease in supply, rents in the city went up overall by 5.1%, meaning now you've started to hurt other people who were barely affording the rents in the first place, right? So this has major effects on where people live. St. Paul, Minnesota, another one. I'm going to talk more about that in a second. Boston and Cambridge, they both got rid of their rent control. It was there about 30 years. You can see this is the Freakonomics thing. You can go see that. This is Berlin, just a few years ago, imposed rent control. After a year, they said it was a disaster. It only took 1 year. It's not like this takes 5 or 10 years, right? This happens very, very fast. The St. Paul, Minnesota one, again, you can look through that paper, but I'll tell you what it says. The value of places where rent control was in place, property prices dropped by almost 12%. Okay, which means a lowering of tax revenue. They estimate, by the way, this happened November of 2021 is when St. Paul instituted rent control. By March, they found that there was a loss of, because they look at transactions, of about $1.6 billion in the housing sector due to rent control, which led to a 4% decline in property taxes. So we're already strapped here for the city to maintain a budget, and this would just lower that. And then they also find a transfer of income from the poor to the rich. Okay? So my view is, we've got about a century of failure around the world. How is it that we could still be implementing rent control? So I have a couple ideas about that. One is, it's kind of easy to do, isn't it? It's not having to raise taxes. It's not having to do anything but go in front of city council and say, you know what? Let's have rent control. Raise your hand if you like it. 6 people raise their hand. Rent control is imposed. Very easy to put on, very difficult to get rid of, and it really hurts us. So I don't like just to trash things, right? I don't like to, without giving some ways to think about what we could do instead. So one thing we could do instead, many of you have probably heard of Section 8 housing. Maybe you don't like the whole program very much, but it transfers income through taxes and redistributes it to those people who need it most. I think in Santa Barbara, we transfer about $90 million federal money from taxes to individuals. So my view is we do something like food stamps, but we call it rent stamps. We transfer income directly to those people who need it most. We don't need to go through this weird thing of rent control. So how would that work? Well, kind of like Section 8. We would look at how much rents are in a city. We would look at incomes that people make. And by the way, we already have that in place with Section 8. Who gets the Section 8 housing? But instead of giving it to landlords, we just give the cash as a rent stamp to tenants. So what does that do? They're then able to pay the market rent, which means we're not going to have a housing shortage. People are going to be willing to build more housing because they're going to get the rents they can get from it, et cetera, and we don't get all these crazy things. So as I mentioned, when we do this and we do think about policy, I was up in front of City Council a couple of weeks ago, telling them basically this, but you only get 3 minutes. So I had 2 minutes donated to me, from some other people. So I had 5 full minutes to talk about rent control. And anyway, so I get up and I talk about rent control as fast as I possibly can. And then I get done and I go sit down. Dr. Ruper, could you come back up? We have a question. Fine. Go back up, answer a question, go sit down. Dr. Ruper, another question. So I ended up getting like 9 minutes, which was pretty good. But what happened in that meeting, if you paid attention to it, City Council had already allocated $200,000 to do a study on rent control. And I said, you know, give it to me. I did actually say that, but I said, I can give you 50 studies on rent control from around the world over 80 years. You don't need to do another study on rent control. We know what happens, you know? So anyway, one of the council members was like, you know, Dr. Ruper, are you saying we shouldn't do this study? I'm like, yeah. And they shelved it. Amazingly, they just shelved it. They said, no, we're not going to do it. So they agreed to have an ad hoc committee to look at alternatives to rent control, to which there are some. So, you know, to me, that was a big win for the city. I think city council is, you know, paying attention, and I was really super impressed that, you know, city council had already allocated money to do that. So, you know, that's kind of the point of what's happening with rent control. Again, you know, I urge you to talk to your council members in your district and say, look, we can figure out a better way. And, you know, my view is we've already decided to transfer income. Let's just do it the most efficient way. Get it to the people who need it most, and not go through all this stuff about fewer houses, who gets it. A couple other notes on that, just so you're aware of it. Santa Monica has rent control. Their rent control board has a budget of $5 million a year. They have 20 FTE that they have to do to maintain rent control. How about just giving the $5 million to the people who need it, right? I mean, so these things generate lots of bureaucracy that we don't need. There's simpler ways, but we have to work more on those simple ways. Anyway, so I now want to bring up Jagdeep Bashir. As Chancellor Yang said, you know, guy's amazing. This is Jagdeep last week you were at NASDAQ. This is Jagdeep ringing the closing bell, NASDAQ last week. Amazing guy. I think you'll all like to hear what he has to say. And anyway, so we're just going to have a conversation. And he did what he said. He wore red shoes with his red turban. So that's...
At least I wore a tie, Peter. And I had to wear sneakers because you wear sneakers.
I know.
It's pretty simple.
Well, welcome, Jagdeep.
My mom may not approve of this, but she's not in the theater.
So we had a nice dinner last night, and we got around to saying, you know, so when you ask some people, you know, what do you do when they give you some words, and I always say, I don't know what that means. You know, you wake up in the morning, what do you do? I mean, when you get to your office, what do you actually do? So that's kind of my first question to Jagdeep. What, you know, so maybe tell us a little bit about what you do, but more importantly, when Jagdeep came he started in 2014 with UC. Give us a little background, sort of where you started, where we are now, and what you've done.
Thank you, Peter. Two things before I tell you what I do. Yes, it may look like it's cool to ring the bell at NASDAQ, but sitting in a theater and doing this, especially in the Granada Theater here, it's a privilege. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and thank you to the whole staff for incredibly organizing today. And secondly, you end up enjoying what you're doing on a daily basis because you have chancellors like Henry and Dilling. And I absolutely love them, both. The amount of love they've shared with me personally over these 8 years has kind of made this a lot of fun. So what do I do? You are here at the UC Santa Barbara campus. I have the privilege of being in Oakland, California, where I'm part of the University of California system. So let me put that in context for you. That's 10 campuses across the state of California, 5 medical centers, 3 national energy labs, a whole bunch of agriculture and natural resource centers. And if you think of the University of California as a company, its revenues per year are $47 billion. So it's a Fortune 500 company in that context. It has 300,000 staff, faculty, employees across the system. And when you think about all of these individuals in this great institution, and there's a number of things we do for our wonderful people. So first of all, we help them save for the future. And that's a pension plan. We offer them a defined benefit pension plan. And those savings amount to about $90 billion in total. That's the defined benefit pension retirement savings program. That's number one. Number two, these individuals, we have 316,000 individuals specifically, voluntarily every year contribute towards their own savings so they can extend the amount of money they have in the future. And that's the DC plan, the 401k, the 457, 403b plans. That is about $36 billion. So 90 plus 36, which means our 300,000 people have about $120 billion, in savings for the future. And every year, voluntarily, they keep sending our office $1.2 billion. That's the inflows on the DC plan. We also are the second largest defined contribution plan in the United States, only second to the federal government in terms of a public system. So it's a pretty big plan. Then, of course, most importantly, the community here and community members in the state of California donate their time and their money and their savings into an endowment for the future of growing the University of California. In the case of the UC system, that's $20 billion. In the case of UC Santa Barbara, that's $250 million. That $20 billion is also part of the Office of the Chief Investment Officer in Oakland. And then, of course, on a day-to-day basis, we have bank accounts. When you make T-shirts or you get tuition fees in, or you pay the bills here and there, you need a bank account to manage all that. That bank account is working capital. That's $22 billion. So 120 billion in savings, 20 billion in endowment, another $22 billion in the working capital, and we also run an insurance company. We self-insure medical malpractice, transportation, property and casualty, all these beautiful buildings that the university owns. That's about $1 billion afloat, and I also help run the insurance asset management. So when you put it all together, depending on the day, we have about 150 to 160 to 170 billion dollars in assets under management. So what do I do, which is your question? This is really what I do. At 10 o'clock in the morning, I get a report. And that report gives me a breakdown in 26 pages, as of last night, on everything I just described to you. I don't do much between the morning and 1 o'clock in the afternoon because there are things happening, like the governor, the feds are going to make some announcements today. There are things we have to think about. And then by about 11 o'clock in the morning, I've picked up the phone and I've called a couple of people saying, this is kind of where we were yesterday. This is what's going on in the world. What do you think? Most days I do nothing because I don't have to do anything when you're a long-term investor. But when it's February 19th of 2020 and it's March 23rd of 2020, there are a few things you got to get done because that was the peak of the market and that was the trough of the market. When it's April 15th of 2020, you got to make some decisions. So the less I do, the better it is for the university system. And more importantly, having fun and actually engaging with the community is probably the most exciting thing that I can do as the CIO for this wonderful university.
Right. So go back to 2014 a little bit.
Okay, perfect.
Just so where were we then and where are we now? And
so 2014, my job started on March 31st, April 1st, roughly. That was the exact day. So here's a couple of things that happened in the world, Peter. On that day, oil was about 120, climbing up to 120 bucks. Between 2013 and 2015, we had just elected Xi Jinping in China and Narendra Modi in India. The Chinese stock market had just crashed. There was a global pandemic in 2014. It was called the Zika virus. It actually turned out that Russia had annexed Crimea in 2014, just about the week I joined. That was my first day on the job. Sound familiar?
yeah, exactly. I mean, that's one of the things we talked about is, the title of this was, investing in tumultuous times. My view is kind of they're always something's always kind of happening, and
Absolutely.
So you have the long run view of what's happening. But so how much did you grow? By the way, the pension fund I think is 94% funded, 95% funded, something.
It was until the recent sort of turbulence in the markets. So.
But I want to be in that 94%. Okay. I mean, just can you write my name down there? That
Peter, with your vintage, you are protected forever.
Okay.
You know that. There are tiers that you're in that I'm not in. But that's a secret. We won't tell the university that. So look, also in 2014, here are some things to keep in mind. The United States of America, which I think, by the way, is the least worst place to be on the planet. The U.S. economy was $17 trillion on that day. 8 years later, April 1st, 2014, it's $25 trillion. The Chinese economy was $8 trillion. It's close to $17 trillion. And the Indian economy was $2 trillion, close to $3 trillion in that 8-year time period. By the way, Apple was market cap 0.5 trillion. It's now $2+ trillion in that same time period. So both companies and countries have grown. Now, at the University of California, by the way, the UC Santa Barbara endowment was $120 billion, and it's now $250 million over that 8 years. So my first couple of years, and you have to keep in mind, in 2014, we were still drinking a lot of Kool-Aid from the global financial crisis. Because in 2007, 8, and 9, we did have a shock to the economy, global economy, but it was centered around malpractices in the real estate market here in the United States. But the world did get impacted significantly. And so we had a lot of stimulus, which now looks like literally nothing compared to the global stimulus we've had in these last 2 years. So we were coming from a high, and by the way, from 2008 for the next decade, the stock market doubled, the economy has grown significantly, because that was driven by a lot of the stimulus. So I joined in 2014, and it's a complex organization at the University of California, let alone the complexity of the university. And you're trying to navigate these different portfolios and simplify things. By the way, the secrets of how I manage things, I always keep in my pocket. I don't like to it's called the UC Investments Way. Once you figure out the culture of how you're going to manage money, make sure you write it down, print 5,000 copies, give it to everybody, then it's the best kept secret you have. There are about 20 copies I have outside for those of you that want to take it. If you don't get one, send an email to Peter, I'll mail you one. But the first thing is less is more, and the second thing is risk rules, and the third thing is concentrate, and there's 7 other things in there. So when I came in 2014 and we were simplifying our life in this complex world, we got to a point where I started to get nervous around 2016, because we had Brexit, right, in 2016. And then 2017, a few things happened politically, I think, in this country. 2018, we had some other things happening. Populism was on the rise, not just here, but everywhere. And so, of course, those were nerve-wracking, new and unique experiences for us, especially in terms of the impact on the markets. The one thing that sort of seemed surprising was how quickly things go down and how quickly things snap back up. And Brexit was the first time I observed that. You thought that with Brexit there would be a protracted sort of stabilization as to getting back to the new normal. It just flipped. We saw that even with the elections here in the United States and other things. By the way, the fastest of all of that was the pandemic. So I came into 2018 and 19 a little nervous about the world. And I started holding cash. On February 19th of 2020, we came into the pandemic, which was the day of the high, with $32 billion of cash. Don't ask me why. Maybe it's one of the 1,000 Indian gods I pray to all day long. But for whatever it was worth, that was my gut. And then, of course, there was February 19th, and then the market dropped 1,000 points, another 1,000, another 1,000. Then we hit March 20th. My concern at that time wasn't what happens to our office and how we manage money. My concern was we had 300,000 people who I have responsibility for. And they were probably nervous about what to do. So I called Marco, my head of the DC
But you're going to
plant.
say you called all 300,000.
No, I did.
Okay, that's
did.
good.
I called Marco to see how I could speak to all 300,000 people. Marco said, you can't do that. You're not a financial advisor like some of you in the room, and you can't give advice. I said, are you kidding with me? Of course I can give advice, and I will give advice, because this is crazy. Somebody needs to tell people to calm down. It's okay. We will get through this time period. So after getting enough lawyers and compliance people involved, we did actually have a webinar on the 20th of March. Talk about timing. And all I said to whoever signed, I think we had about 1,000 people that signed on. I said, look, stay calm, have a plan, stay the course. Not a lot of great wisdom. But on the 23rd of March, we actually observed we were seeing millions of dollars going out of the DC plan every day because people were getting nervous. And within 4 days of that webinar, live, we went to 0 a day. And that made me realize the importance of what I do on a daily basis, some days, is serving our community and recognizing that you need to stay calm through turbulent times. Because I know there's a lot of talk about the stock market. But keep in mind, if you actually were to look at the S&P 500, 2 years ago, we're still 1,000 points higher than where we were 2 years ago. It may look like we're a little down right now, but you need to stay calm through turbulent times. So that $32 billion of cash in April, we went back in the markets $3 billion a week. And the rest is history.
Yeah.
Last year, we had our best year in 152 years.
Yeah.
We grew by $38 billion over that time period. And that provides a lot of runway. I think that's probably 5 times the size of Harvard, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that growth was not just in the portfolio. Personally, I grew the most last year as an individual, as an investor, in the 20 years that I've been doing this. And I think my key message to all of you, if you want to take a message away from this conversation, is just stay calm. Stay calm, have a plan, and don't overreact. Because it's not timing the market, it's how much time you spend in the market. That's what matters.
Okay. So speaking of tumultuous times, so inflation's 8.5%.
Right.
The Fed is going to announce probably 50 basis point increase. Could
Absolutely.
surprise us, but this time and probably next time.
Absolutely.
How much cash do you have now?
Not much.
Not much.
Not much. So, a couple of $1 billion. But having said that, I do have $40 billion of fixed income, and I view now fixed income as cash.
Okay.
Liquidity. So when you own treasury bills, right, you don't necessarily need to keep it, under the mattress. It's as liquid. By the way, and why do I say that? It's not a trivial, just a sort of cavalier point. It's the biggest surprise in March of 2020 is U.S. Treasuries did not trade. This is the deepest financial instrument on planet Earth. It has $20 trillion in it, and it did not trade in March of 2020.
Yeah.
That is why we had the cash, because I didn't want it to be in something that wouldn't trade, and no one would have anticipated that to ever happen in
Right.
history. So
So
now,
10-year Treasury now is like 3%, something
correct,
like that?
10-year Treasury is just over 3. So I'm, holding Treasuries is as good as holding cash. So if you look at it that way, I have about $40 billion of dry powder. I was very impressed with some of the properties I saw in the slides earlier. Full disclosure, I did tell my friend to get me a tour of one of those after this, because I delayed the flight till 5 o'clock. So I'm gonna go looking. I'm being honest.
Yeah.
He's smiling. Okay.
Yeah. So again, 10-year Treasury over 3, mortgage rates over 5.
Right. So let's talk.
Where are you putting your money now? You've got this $40 billion. You're happy with the fixed income?
Okay, so let's break it down, right? So if you're an individual and you've got money outside of what is in your bank account, you really have 3 choices in life. You could be in the stock market, you could buy bonds, or you could invest your money in what we call illiquid assets, like real estate or other types of things like that. Those are really your 3 choices. Now, on the stock market, I think you just heard my view, right? Stay calm, have a plan, depending on your time horizon. That's the most important thing to keep in mind. The advantage I think I have, and many of you most likely have as well, is that whatever we do, we're doing it for future generations. That's what I do at the University of California. We do it for future generations of students and faculty and staff. Our office has been managing these assets for 90 years. In 10 years, we're going to cross 100 years. I mean, how many investors here can say they've been managing a portfolio for that long in an institution that's around for 152 years? So time horizon is our advantage, believe it or not. And that is not trivial. That gives us the ability to be calm and be patient and ride out storms. So that's number one. So the stock market over the long term is still a good bet because you have to look at global growth, right? The US may be slowing down in growth, but when we talk to companies and we look at earnings and we look at what is going on in the economy, it is slower, but it's not bad. We will see 2 to 3% growth in the US economy, which is kind of, where it's been for a while. China, common prosperity is a very important part of the agenda for the next 5 years from the government's direction. But having said that, you could expect 4 to 5% growth, maybe 5.5%, which is the stated objective for the next 5 years, doesn't get met, but it's still a reasonably good target. And then you add India. India is going to grow, let's call it about 5% a year as well. By the way, the Indian stock market, if you just would have bought MSCI India, very simple, 1 basis point, 2 basis points, has been the best stock market in the last 10 years of any stock market on planet Earth. I just happened to come back from India. We've been looking at India for a long time. I've actually been the most bearish on India before I came to the UC. I'm stating for you a simple fact, not because I'm Indian or I look Indian. So if you add the United States, China, and India, and if you ignore the rest of the world for a moment, you will still see global growth. So stock market is, depending on your time horizon, a reasonable place to be, number one. Bonds, challenging. Why? Because a simple thing about bonds is as prices go, rates go up, the return goes down. And from where we stand today, it's almost guaranteed and inevitable that interest rates will keep rising. And as interest rates keep rising, the return that you will earn by being in bonds is going to be negative. Fact of life. So not a great investment to be in bonds. You're probably better off being in cash or holding it under a mattress than actually necessarily having bonds, okay? So now, but that's me speaking, and there are municipal bonds, there are all kinds of other instruments and varieties of bonds, but generally speaking, bonds are not going to be an attractive place to be. Now, real estate to me was the biggest surprise of the pandemic. Clearly, you've talked about residential real estate. So I know you talk about location, location, location. My mantra on real estate is talent, talent, talent. Technology, technology, technology. And then location. What do I mean by that? The best business to be in is in the education business. I mean, whether you're in India or China, what do you want to do with your kids? You want to send them to UC Santa Barbara. Not a bad business to be in, right? Eventually, immigration policies and border controls will get sorted out. But the education business will always grow. And when you think about demand and supply in the education business, how can you go wrong with student housing? You just can't. Because you need to put these kids somewhere to live. And the number one constraint to the growth of our education business is physical infrastructure.
Yep.
Having housing, not just for students. I know there were some charts that talked about housing prices. You know, one of the biggest challenges of this pandemic has been income disparity, inequality, because the rich have gotten richer and the poor have gotten poorer. Don't ignore that fact when you think about real estate and affordability. And I know we talked about rent control, but our faculty and staff should not have to drive an hour away or 2 hours away to come to work, because that affordability is unacceptable. So we're going to have to talk about building more physical infrastructure in and around our campuses in all across the state of California. That's probably the lowest hanging fruit that I can take advantage of.
But you're
with our
doing that,
balance sheet.
right?
Absolutely.
You guys are investing in buying up some real estate.
We own real estate in Santa Barbara today, right? And we own, you know, right at the edge of campus. But we will continue to look for housing all around the country, in and around the University of California. You need we may be down on offices, that's okay, but offices being converted into life sciences labs are one of the biggest opportunities that exist today. There's probably 4 million more square feet of demand than supply of life sciences lab space to actually tinker around for the talent to create the next generation of companies. So yes, we can get depressed with the statistics and the headlines and the charts, but just remember, if you think about where the talent is today and growing, and where technology is having an impact, and the universities is where that engine of growth is coming from, we probably have one of the best real estate markets in and around our campuses all around the state of California and all around the university, all around the country. So it is still going to be a fantastic business to be in.
Okay.
And I think, so when you talk about inflation and some of these issues, that's for real. I think the biggest challenge is we did not expect Ukraine and Russia to have the type of war that was going on right now. And I think as much as we've talked about Santa Barbara today, what happens around the world does impact your lives. There's a geopolitical, changing landscape that is actually driving these high energy prices for all of us, which is then being translated at the gas pump, which goes into inflation. But furniture is still clogged in shipping containers, and that might likely take another year to year and a half to release that sort of bottleneck we have in the supply chain. So when we thought we'd be out of this pandemic into a more normalized situation, I think you need to push that out another 2 years from now. And just like you said in one of your charts, 5 years from now, you're going to erase the COVID data, and the chart is going to look better. If you're patient enough, we will get through this. But it's not possible to get through a $25 trillion economy, putting a sugar high of 11 trillion in, and expecting the medicine is going to turn off right away, and that the patient will be out of the intensive care unit instantaneously. There is a recovery period, but don't get overwhelmed by the recovery period. And remember your time horizon. It is long term.
Yep.
Because we hope to all live longer with all the drugs we're taking right now.
So
Pharmacy, right?
pharmacy, yeah. So, yeah.
You know what I'm talking about.
I know. So about investing, I mean, many, many years ago, I think that, what we were after was, return. And that was it. It was all return. And then all of a sudden there was some shift, and we started thinking about sustainable investing, ESG and stuff like that. And I think you were one of the first to really think seriously about that. I remember talking to you many, many years ago about that. So how's that done for you? I mean, what's your view there?
Of course. And we've both become famous with the students over the years around sustainability and climate change. So, when I came here to the University of California, I want to remind you, I moved here from Edmonton, Alberta, which is what they call the oil sands. The last thing on my mind would have been climate change, because it's the dirtiest oil on the planet, and I helped run the Sovereign Wealth Fund, where the royalties from these oil sands were fueling future generations of assets. So I came here. One of the first things on my desk was Berkeley students suggesting that we needed to get out of fossil fuels. So I realized I couldn't avoid the subject, and I had to pay attention to it, and that led to sort of a journey of discovery for me. And the more time I spent with our faculty and our staff all across our 10 campuses, I realized that clearly climate change is a big issue. And climate change in the state of California, us being leaders, is going to remain a very important contribution we can make to the world. And as a result, there are significant challenges with respect to the damage not paying attention to climate change can have on your portfolios. A very simple one is if you buy a utility. You're all familiar with PG&E, right? But if you buy an electric utility and you don't put a price of carbon, even if it's a guesstimated price of carbon, and looking out 10 years, you could end up having a cash flow model that looks very bad if you didn't estimate what carbon prices look like. So the more time I spent with the community, the more I realized, look, climate change is real. Climate change is a significant issue for us to pay attention to. And our job as long-term investors is to focus on not the oil price in 2014 or 2022, but really to think about sustainably having a portfolio that can outlast even me in the organization. And then it became crystal clear that if climate change is a risk, you really need to pay attention to it in however you assess the opportunities you're investing in. So the first thing we did is we said, we're not going to buy any more oil and gas. That was simple. Then we took 8 years, and actually when oil was 110 back in 2014, we started to sell. Then we got rid of coal, because that didn't make a lot of sense to us. And then we slowly started to sell the rest of our oil and gas portfolio. And I think it was a very lonely road, and like the Lonely Planet all over this time period. But then by 2018, we discovered that we had actually sold all our fossil fuels in our entire portfolio. And at that point, we said, you know what? Now we can relax. Now we can actually, and in that time period, we decided to invest in cleaner energy. So it's not a flip one and don't do anything else. And if you look at the last 8 years, the price of solar and storage has become so attractive in California. And the price curve on these alternative energies has continued to come down, which has made it even more attractive to own alternative energies. Now, the argument is, but there's not enough alternative energy in the world for everybody else. I get it, but I only have to manage one portfolio. It's not my problem to manage everybody else's portfolio. But if everybody does their part, then we can all do a better job for the rest of the planet. Now, I don't get good marks at home, because I do make a mistake of where to throw the garbage. And my daughter is not impressed. And she always says, what's up with all that climate change thing you do at the university when you can't even get waste management at home right? So I am learning how to make this real on a day-to-day basis, but of course the headlines are, I don't get any credit at home for anything I do.
But if you looked at the return from doing what you did, I mean...
So here's the bad news first. My returns aren't going to look good this year. Because the best performing sector in the S&P 500 has been energy and materials. Of course. This year, if you just bought the S&P 500 and you bought the S&P 500 without fossil fuel companies, you would have done better by about 1% just owning the S&P 500, including energy. That's this year. But over 3 years, they're roughly flat. Over 7 years, the S&P 500 without fossil fuels has still done better than with fossil fuels. The biggest mistake I may have made is not listening to our students the moment they came and said we should do this. Because had I done it right away in 2014, 8 years ago, those numbers even look better than they do today. But you can't judge yourself on this year. You've got to judge yourself on a longer time period. And I am a firm believer that climate change is a risk, like diversity, equity, and inclusion, if you don't pay attention to it, or other things around being a sustainable investor in your portfolio. It's no longer easy enough as a leader today to sit down and say, I'm just going to look at a discounted cash flow model and then close the books and go back home. That's not how you wake up and spend your day.
Okay, I see, yeah. We don't have a lot of time left, but...
but you're the boss.
Crypto.
Crypto.
You got some?
Just for fun. But yeah, so look, crypto, let's look at it this way. If you take a view into the future, and my best competitive advantage as an investor is not everything I do that's a commodity we buy, but it's the fact that I actually am at the University of California. That's my fourth pillar, what makes the UC UC. 5 years out from now, it's crystal clear that gene editing is going to have a huge impact on our lives and biology and computation, okay? No questions about it. no questions about it that we might have forgotten about the fact that cancer is actually a big killer in this country. Immunotherapy and immuno-oncology is absolutely going to play a huge role into the future. When you think about the impact of machine learning and artificial intelligence and data sciences all combined into new applications, no questions about it. It already is big, and it's only getting bigger with the amount of data that we're accumulating for the things we do. So these are just three of a number of examples. But I think when you think about financial services, I was talking to one of your students at the reception last night, and her thesis is around sort of, the pay now or pay later type applications. When you think about finance and you think about financial technologies and you think about the decentralization of finance, there are brand new business models evolving. We don't know what the impact of them are, but the reality is that there will be new companies, new technologies. Now, in that landscape, I know we talked a little bit about cancel culture, but the reality is individuals want more control over their destiny. I think we are sick and tired of these monopolistic, autocratic environments that tell us this is how it's going to be, and they have the ultimate power and control on things. Human beings are getting tired of that. They want control, they want power, and decentralization is another theme that goes in that direction. So blockchain, I know you asked me about crypto, and like a politician, I kind of circled the question, but crypto and blockchain as an underlying infrastructure, decentralized finance, I think there will be great things that happen in that area. And if you look at the adoption curves and you compare to 1998, what happened in the internet with the whole area around blockchain and crypto, they look pretty similar. You may have a 2000 type crash because it doesn't make a lot of sense to pour so much money, especially when you don't know what the applications are. I mean, buying an ape for $1 million just to feel like you're rich and having a monkey in your wallet isn't exactly an application that I think is something that I'm excited about. But you know what? Other people are doing it, if you're a basketball player or other folks. So the reality is when there are more widespread applications that impact our day-to-day lives, I think you might see the rapid adoption of things. But every traditional S-curve, right, not the demand and supply curve, shows you slow adoption until you hit an inflection point, and then it becomes mainstream. Amazon, Netscape, I mean, go back and look at 2000. We're living in probably the best of times we've ever lived. And COVID is this amazing catalyst that has re-engineered our day-to-day lives. It's given all of us more control on our destiny. And it's given us a clearer picture of the things we care about, the things we like to do, and the things we want to spend our time with. And I think when you put all that together, this is probably one of the most fascinating times, if not for all of you, but for your children. My 9-year-old and 14-year-old, I will conclude by telling you, you asked me, how do I spend my time? It's a waste of time if I spend my time talking to my peers. You know what's a more exciting time? Is when I wake up in the morning and I look at the world through the eyes of my 9-year-old son, my 14-year-old daughter. Because if I can see his excitement around playing NBA 2K on my phone and the reality in this virtual world that he's enthusiastic about, I have to be curious to ask a question about what is this new world? That's the world we're living in. It is more fascinating than it was 2 years ago. We just had a wake-up call to get there sooner.
Yeah. So, one more thing.
The glass is half full, yes.
Yeah, no. So we talked a little bit about, and this isn't a sales pitch or anything, but you have 170 billion assets under management.
Right.
And Jagdeep and I talked yesterday a little bit about partnering.
Yes.
About what you can do. So just, you can tell them a little bit what you mean by that.
Yeah, please. Thank you for reminding me that. I know you think about, today's been about UC Santa Barbara, but the way I'd like you to look at to me and the University of California more broadly, and and our office is, we really are a $170 billion investor. We happen to be part of your family. What I realized in preparing for this conversation with Peter is we need to do a better job of engaging with the community. There are going to be real estate projects. There are going to be companies. I mean, I spent my day yesterday with a chemistry professor as soon as I arrived here. and talked about hair care products, even though mine are all hidden. But the reality is there will be a new generation of entrepreneurial companies that come out of Santa Barbara. I mean, the people in the community have accomplished so much, but haven't stopped being creative about what the next world is going to look like. And so I want you to think about our office as a $170 billion investor that you can partner with. We can write a check to buy 20 plus acres. We can do that. We can buy housing. We own hotels. I was fascinated by looking at all of those things.
Yeah.
But nobody calls me. I feel bad.
Call him.
Please, please call me.
Actually, you want him to call me first. Right?
Actually, yeah, call Peter.
Okay,
call
thanks.
Peter. Diane Klein, my chief of staff, is over there, so if you can't get me today, you get Diane. But look, as we build Santa Barbara, as we build the next generation of companies, I want you to think about us as an investment partner, not just our office, but the University of California in a way that you never would have thought before. And I am genuinely suggesting that, please, I am open to being an investment partner to this community for things that make economic sense for our portfolio, which is also what you care about. And ultimately, we will help the University of California because that money goes back to the benefit of our pensioners and not paid out in fees to a variety of people. So that's what I mean by partnering, and it dawned on me, if I'm here, I might as well do some things that actually are interesting, because otherwise, what's the point? So if you have an idea or you have an opportunity, absolutely call Peter Ruper, no questions about it. And I want Peter to then, give me sort of this input on what might be interesting. And I come to Santa Barbara once a quarter because I go to speak to the foundation. In fact, I'm here next week again for the foundation meeting. Whenever I come, I want to make it a point to meet with the community and engage with you however I can. The flights are not that convenient to Oakland. It's a 2-day trip for sure. But I'm here. Let's spend the time and let's see if there are things we can do together. But I think this could be a fantastic opportunity for us to partner more deeply with this community and do some interesting things.
I agree. Appreciate it. So
CIO.jb@ucop.edu.
peter.rupert@ucsb.edu. It's a lot easier. But anyway, Jagdeep, thank you very much. Appreciate your time, and looking forward to partnering with you in the future.
Peter, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, man. That was great. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
So thank you very much. That was an action-packed 2 hours of a lot of information. If you want to go to the UCSB Economic Forecast website, there's a lot of information there, copies of all our past webinars for the last 2 years. And a plug, if you enjoyed this, send a note to your sponsor that invited you. Good day.